Okay, thank you, Ashley. Okay, welcome back, everyone. My name is Taryn. For those of you who just joined, I am co-chair. I'm co-chairing the NFU-O AGM Convention with Eric, who you'll see there waving. Wonderful. So this panel this afternoon is called Buy, 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 Land Grabbing and Farmland Financialization. So I'm very pleased to introduce this panel of longtime dedicated organizers and academics fighting for food sovereignty in Canada, some of whom are NFU members. So we'll ask that you please save your questions to the end. We'll have about 15 minutes for discussion. I'm also going to ask for folks who are able to open their cameras, please do so. If you're not multitasking or have things going on in the background, it really helps the speaker to connect with us. So if we can at least have a few of us on camera, I think it's really nice. Appreciate it. So first we'll hear from Annette Desmarais. Annette is a Canada Research Chair in Human Rights, Social Justice, and Food Sovereignty at the University of Manitoba. Annette is the author of La Via Campesina, Globalization and the Power of Peasants, and many other books and articles on food sovereignty. Her most recent edited book is Frontline Farmers, How the NFU Resists Agribusiness and Creates Our New Food Future by Fernwood Publishing. It's a highly recommended book. After Annette, we'll hear from Katherine Aske. Katherine leads the practicum program at the University of British Columbia Farm on unceded Musqueam territory, where she teaches farming skills and food systems analysis. Katherine is going into her 6th season of organic mixed vegetables production. She is also a researcher whose work explores the financialization of farmland. Katherine is currently the chair of the NFU's Farmland Committee. And our final speaker on the panel is Andrea Boucaud, known to many as Peachtree. Andrea, or Peachtree, is a matriarchal architect builder of ideas and passion. She is an advocate for and supporter of grassroots organizing and community development spaces. Andrea works to support many organizing spaces, both locally and internationally, including Black Creek Community Farm, Black Food Sovereignty Toronto, Toronto Food Policy Council, Frontline Books and Publishing, and the newly created Sprouting Black Liberation, Bees, Seeds, and Beads. So each panelist has 15 minutes, and then we'll have time for Q&A. Our fellow co-organizer, Dave Thompson, will give you a 2-minute warning when you're approaching time. So please go ahead, Annette. When you're ready, can share your presentation. Oh, and if you want to unmute.
That would be a good idea.
Go ahead.
Okay. Okay, hi everybody. Thanks so much for inviting me to be here as part of this panel. And I'm just going to share my screen here. Okay. So I want to start off essentially with 3 quotes from a recent study called Uneven Ground, Land Inequality at the Heart of Unequal Societies, because I think these so clearly affirm the need to address this big, huge problem that we have, which is land inequality. So the first quote: the largest 1% of farms in the world operate 70% of farmland. These farms form the core of production for the corporate food systems. The second quote: land can be a major engine of shared prosperity, or it can be one of the most pervasive drivers of inequality. And the last quote: land inequality sits at the heart of other forms of inequality. It is fundamentally related and often central to broader inequalities. So there's really no other way of getting around it. That is, land inequality is directly related to various inequalities, which is why tackling the central issue of land inequality is so important. So this current rise of land inequality is certainly related to the most recent global land grab. Now, land grabbing has been on the rise since 2008, following the financial and food crises. So increases in very large land acquisitions occurred because when food prices jumped sky high overnight, this, of course, led to a growing concern about food security in countries that were really dependent on food imports. So some land scarce countries sought to purchase land in other countries so that they could then ensure that food would be available for their own populations. Meanwhile, investors were also, keeping their eyes open and began to see farmland as a new target for investment. And as you can see on this slide, investors have a particular view of what land is. Now, land grabbing usually refers to large-scale land deals that involve the purchase or leasing of land by either domestic or foreign investors, banks, corporations, or individuals. So it's a global phenomenon. It's happening in the countryside in many countries around the world. Now, what I want to do today is talk about one case, on the prairies, but I want to concentrate mostly on Saskatchewan, a province where 40% of Canada's agricultural land is situated. So, although large-scale land acquisitions in Saskatchewan really flew under the radar for several years, in 2013, it became very controversial. And that is, you can see the headlines here on local and national newspapers. They kind of captured, some of what was going on. But there was one particular issue, which was when the CPP bought up 113,000 acres of farmland in the province. That event, really triggered a lot of concern, even concern among our conservative government representatives. But because no one was actually tracking this, no one was tracing what was going on and assessing it, we got access to the land titling data because we wanted to know what was going on the ground, how much land was being bought up by investors, where were they buying up this land, and how much of the land were they buying up. And what we saw with this data, we were able to actually track, how much land they were purchasing over time. And as you can see on this slide, investors have been increasing their presence in Saskatchewan in the countryside, especially since 2008. Which is exactly the timeline that I talked about earlier. It coincides with what was going on in other countries as far as land deals and land grabbing, and also the crises. So to capture the changes in land ownership in the province, we wanted to compare it, what was going on in 2002 and then later on in 2014. And we chose those years because 2002 was the year when Saskatchewan changed its land legislation to open up land purchases to any other Canadian. Before that, it was only residents of Saskatchewan who could own farmland. So that change in legislation was really, really important. Now, our research indicates that over that time, from 2002 to 2014, the amount of farmland owned by investors increased by 16-fold. And you can see the numbers here on the table. And, you know, when you look at that, you know, the fact that they only, investors only own 1.44% of the total land base in Saskatchewan, you might think, well, okay, why are you so worried? It's not even 2%. But I'm going to come back to that because it's actually important when you start looking at what happens at the local level. Okay, so just so that we're clear on what we mean by investors, investors include private individuals, pension plans, farmland investment firms, and also what we call a farmer investor hybrid. And now that last category refers to private individuals who may be farming, but they're also connected to directly through ownership of other parts of the industrial food chain, like they're part of, or they own parts of beef packing plants or intensive livestock operations. So this is the map of how much land investors owned in 2002. And the little blue dots, which you can hardly see, that's, you know, that's where those blue dots represent land that's owned by investors or farmer investor hybrids. And you can hardly see them because it wasn't allowed, right? Until the law changed. So by 2014, you see that they've acquired a significant amount of land. And by 2018, it's even worse. They're acquiring, you know, they're gobbling up more and more land. And if you add to that, the acres that large farmers own, and we're talking about over 30,000 acres, then this is what the map looks like. So you can see that over a short period of time, there's been a significant change in land ownership in the province. So I'm going to try to speed up here. Okay, so with the land titling data, we were able to identify exactly who these investors are and also how much land they have been purchasing. Our latest data, we compared 2014 to 2018, and as you can see, they continue to acquire more and more land. And this is even with the change in legislation in 2016 that sought to tighten the legislation to kind of help stop the entry of some types of investors in the province. But as we can see, investors are continuing to purchase land. Overall, it increased in those 4 years, it increased by 13%. And you can also see that if you look at the farmer investor hybrid, some of the bigger ones of those in that category are also acquiring more and more land. And I'm thinking specifically of Annette Farms here on this slide. They've actually expanded into the US and also into wine production in BC. One of the things that we've noticed, and this is linked to trying to understand whether or not and how investors are affecting land markets. And what we saw was that investors were purchasing in certain pockets of the province. So the darker the shade here, the higher percentage of land. How can I explain that? The darker the shade is where the investors were purchasing more of the land. Okay, that came up on the market. And as we know, there's only a certain amount of land that actually makes it to the market every year. But what we saw was that in those darker shaded rural municipalities, investors were purchasing a considerable amount of the land. And in fact, when you can then, and there were 16 of these high activity rural municipalities that we identified. So what they, our numbers, we also analyzed the land transaction data and saw that in some years, those investors were purchasing up to 20 to 30% of all of the arm's length transactions, okay? And also of great concern was that they were paying considerably more for those acres. For example, they were paying up to 39% more per acre than other buyers in the, who were also buying arm's length, at arm's length, and 72% more than purchases made, within the family. So they do affect the market, which they, investors tend to deny that they actually have an impact on the market. So, and the other thing, of course, is that one of the great consequences here is that because land is so expensive and rents are so expensive, it means that there's less land on the market. And when land does come available, the only people who can afford it are people who have deep pockets. And those tend to be larger farmers and investors, and they're purchasing up the land, which means that they're increasing their concentration of land in certain areas. All of this means that there is no land available or accessible for the younger generation. This actually, leads us right into this big, huge problem that we have. The number one barrier for the next generation is that they don't have access to farmland. Now, investors have been quite public about the fact that they think that they're doing farmers a favor, and that, farmers like this. They like the fact that they're losing their assets. Well, we surveyed 400 farmers on the prairies. This is, in the 3 prairie provinces. And when they were asked, what's your sense of the impact that investors are having on the local farmland market, for example, and 76% of farmers, of young farmers, said that the impact was negative or very negative. And it's interesting that there's a real difference with what young farmers said versus the older farmers. There's a significant percentage, lower percentage of older farmers who felt that investors had some impact, but it wasn't as significant as the younger farmers. On the other hand, older farmers.
Friendly 2-minute warning, Annette.
Okay, 83%, just over 83% of older farmers, that is 55 years of age and over, indicated that investors were having a very negative or negative impact on the rural community. So farmers don't like it in general, is the message that I got from that survey. So I just wanted to wrap up by just saying, some of the key takeaways that we took from this research was that, we need to understand what's going on the ground. That's key. Land grabbing is occurring, and it's continuing to occur in the province. It's causing all kinds of problems, all kinds of tension, divisions within communities. Farmers are deeply concerned about what's going on. There's a deep unease about this. And of course, they're facing significant challenges in purchasing or renting land. And it's overwhelmingly, farmers felt that investor activity or presence in the province is negative or very negative for local communities and also the farmland market. Last thing, I guess it taught us is that we need to develop more better, strict land legislation, and we need alternative land tenure models. Thank you.
Wonderful, Annette. Thank you. Plenty to discuss there. So we'll have time for that after. Katherine, go ahead if you have slides. If not, that's okay, but go ahead.
Thank you, Taryn. Yes, I do have slides. Give me a sec here.
Take your time. Sometimes it takes a minute to get them up.
Sure does. Okay.
I'll let you know when we can see them.
Great.
Yep, looks good.
Okay. Okay, I think we're good here then. Great. All right, well, an honor to be here. Hi, everyone. I'm Katherine. Really pleased to be here with Annette and Peachtree on this panel. I am going to build off of what Annette just told us. Some of the information is slightly overlapping, but mostly I think she beautifully set up what I'm going to talk about, which is the financialization of farmland, a very boring academic name for a serious problem. And I'll just say that I'm calling in today from unceded Musqueam territory, where I live and farm. Okay, so, ooh, you guys are in the way of my notes here. I'll put you down at the bottom. There we go. Okay, so I thought we could start with some helpful advice from Farm Credit Canada. This is an article where they talk about high farmland values and acknowledge some of the challenges associated with them, and then go on to give some advice at the end of the article, which includes the following. Farmland often carries an emotional attachment, particularly if it's land that has been in the family for many years. While passion is commendable, it's unwise to let emotions govern farmland purchase decisions. So please, avoid having any connection to the land and view it as an asset class as much as possible. Later in the article, they also write, you'll sometimes hear someone proclaim that land is so expensive that it will never pay itself off. Does that make buying land a bad deal? There are two revenue considerations with land: the revenue from what you produce on the land, and the wealth generation if the value of land continues to appreciate. So to me, what seems to be happening here is FCC is normalizing, farmers becoming investors first and producers second. Okay, so before we get back to farmland, what is financialization? Many of you hopefully know by now, but very quickly, this is a process by which financial actors, motives, markets, and institutions are becoming increasingly powerful in spaces they were not involved before. To understand the financial economy, we can contrast it with the productive economy, where goods and services are produced. Whereas in the financial economy, capital is accumulated through rent, interest, dividends, and capital gains. The financial economy began to rise in the 1970s to a point now where it's the primary space where capital is accumulated. And I always like to explain that the financial economy essentially allows those with capital, the wealthy largely, to accumulate more without contributing anything to society. But to complicate things, increasingly, the way working class and middle class people are funding their lives and retirements is through the financial economy. And this is because, wages are no longer matching the cost of living. Governments have been absolving themselves of risk management, such as is the case with pension plans, etc. Okay, so what does this have to do with farmland? The answer requires that we repoliticize high farmland prices as more than the benign result of commodity price booms or a lack of new land being produced. Very briefly, I'll just acknowledge that much of what I'm about to talk about is pulled from my research that I did with Annette in Alberta, which is detailed in this report, Finance in the Fields, where I interviewed 52 grain and oilseed farmers across Alberta. Okay, so in my work in Alberta, I found that financialization is contributing hugely to pushing up farmland prices in 3 different ways. At first, I just want to acknowledge, my work was in Alberta, but I did a quick peruse this morning of some StatsCan data and found that, I knew that farmland prices in Ontario were super high, some of the highest in the country. Of course, you have, your province has more population pressure and sort of money flying around than in a lot of other parts of the country. But I was pretty shocked to see that in 2012, which is considered to be sort of like one of the, maybe still the peak that we know of, at least, of investor farmland interest in the globally. Ontario farmland prices went up 30.1% in that one single year in 2012. And I also saw that in 2021, farmland prices went up 22.2%. And we know that was also when we had that big sort of housing price boom, which of course is connected. Anyway, really crazy. Okay, so the first way in which I found the financialization of farmland was happening was through the deregulation of banks and changes in bank lending policies since the early 2000s. Banks lending on equity as opposed to on cash flows, lending big or not at all, lending, lending in ways that they were not previously, lending also through interest-only loans. Number 2, as Annette explained in some detail, which is great, I found, unsurprisingly, that in Alberta, like in much of the world, investors of all stripes had begun buying up farmland ever since 2008. And finally, I also found that everyone, including farmers, including the descendants of farmers, were beginning to have more of a rent-seeking and or speculative relationship to farmland than they had previously. So let me give you an example of that. I don't know how often this is the case in parts of Ontario, but in the grain and oilseed commodity context of the prairies, many farmers told me that the price of a quarter section, so that's 160 acres on the prairies, had become so high that you could not pay off that section of land in a whole lifetime of farming grain on it. This, of course, means that any farmer purchasing that land is actually doing so as a speculator. Oh my goodness, these slides are so funny. How the financialization of farmland limits our ability to transform. I'm guessing most of you heard about the IPCC report that was released this week, and maybe some of you had the dystopian experience that I had of like scrolling headlines and mixed in between some celebrity update and Trump getting arrested was like headlines like this one. Scientists deliver final warning on climate crisis, act now or it's too late. This is just to say, we know, especially as NFUers, we're well aware that the agricultural system needs to be transformed. It's deeply inequitable, it contributes so much to climate change, and it is so vulnerable to it as well, to its effects. So I have a lot to say here, it seems. How does the financialization of farmland with these high farmland prices limit our ability to transform? So we know financialization leads to high farmland prices, high debt loads, more absentee owners. This means only the largest farms and investors are able to purchase farmland, as Annette spoke to. This means more concentration. This means less community sovereignty, less democracy. More people controlling lands where they don't live leads to, farmland increasingly being viewed purely as a speculative asset more than anything else, and the prioritization of financial metrics on the land. The other thing that we know happens when farmland prices are really high is that farmers increasingly become tenants. Being a tenant disconnects you from the long-term health of the land, means you have annual rental payments, limits your sovereignty, even to become organic, excuse me, on rented land, like it's just essentially impossible when you're on a 3 to 5 year contract, or doesn't make any sense. Okay, a couple more things. Farmers are heavily indebted. in our current system, which is, in large part due to crazy farmland prices. Indebted farmers can't take risks, aren't as open or able to try new production types, don't have the same financial flexibility to, not make money for a couple of years as they transition. And generally also farmland prices being so high means that there's all this hype around making land as valuable as possible, which in many cases on the prairies at least has involved draining the land, tearing down bush lines, making every quarter, farmable corner to corner. So this is having devastating consequences in terms of the land's ability to be resilient in the face of the climate crisis, and of course is also destroying biodiversity. Finally, financialization enshrines business as usual. We know conventional ag contributes hugely to climate change, and it stops new farmers, as Annette said beautifully. We desperately need as many new farmers as possible. New farmers can't get on the land when prices are this high and farmer incomes are this low, and it really inhibits us from, transforming agricultural land tenure relations from an equity perspective. Okay, so a couple of quick ideas, big ideas. This one, Katie Ward, who I think is here, has talked lots about. I think it's terribly exciting. We're faced with this major challenge in resisting the financialization of farmland, which is that a strong number of retiring farmers are reliant on the sale of their land to the highest bidder in order to retire with dignity. So, that means that they're going to sell out to the only people who can buy, which are typically the largest farms and or investors. So how do we build a movement to resist financialization when, if we were to bring down land prices, it would really cause economic harm to a lot of these farmers? We need another way we need farmers to be able to capture more of the value of what they produce. Can't forget that part. But we also need to give farmers a different form of retirement security, like a pension plan, although hopefully not a pension plan that invests in privatizing Brazil's oil rights and farmland in the prairies. Okay, another big idea, why we need a public land bank. Annette talked about Robert Angelic, who maybe is the largest landowner in Canada, but I don't think we know that. Owns a ton of land on the prairies, an absurd amount of land, just about the same amount as Bill Gates owns across the US. I'm so out of breath. I was this week in a NFU meeting with a farmer named Jim out here in BC who made a quip about how maybe Angelic owning this land is a good argument for us having a public land bank, since we basically already have a private one that just benefits Angelic alone. But in all seriousness, in case any of you haven't heard about this, this was tried in Canada in the 70s in Saskatchewan. The NDP, it was a similar situation of really high farmland prices. The Saskatchewan NDP decided to purchase land from farmers at market value, farmers who were selling, that is. They weren't forcing anyone to sell. Then they put that land into a public land bank. Then they offered farmers lifetime leases that they could transfer onto their children. It had its flaws, but in many ways, it's like a pretty remarkable system that when the Conservatives came to power a couple of years later was immediately scrapped. I think that something like a public land bank could be a really promising solution to decommodify farmland en masse and pull it out of the market system. But obviously we need to think of like other ways, like maybe the government could buy land, put it into community holdings, for example, or something that would protect against, the project being scrapped when the government changed power. Okay, final slide here. A couple more ruminations on ways out of this mess. High farmland prices are super political. Spread the word. Anytime you hear your neighbors saying, like quoting Mark Twain, they aren't making any more of it, intervene and have a conversation about it. There's nothing inevitable about the way things are set up, right? We've designed it this way. I also believe we really need to be organizing across movements right now, like perhaps with those who are resisting the financialization of housing and housing speculation, because really housing and farmland are victims of the same forces. We need to demand provincial governments track and report on land ownership and how it's changing. You know, it's amazing, so amazing the work that Annette and her team did in Saskatchewan, and that they've been working to replicate in other provinces. But you know, it can't only be on public researchers. We need governments to be doing this work. As Annette said as well, we need to restrict investor farmland ownership. I also think we need to really think about re-regulating our banks, as you know, the SVB in the US is showing us. We need to keep fighting to protect the Greenbelt and other prime farmland. You know, obviously in Ontario, more than other parts of the country, like farmland being paved over is a very real, scary thing that's happening. We need to keep organizing for farmers to reclaim more of the value of what they produce. And finally, and I know that this is more in the realm of what Peachtree is going to get into, you know, we need to support local farmland decommodification and equity building through models like community land trusts, you know, cooperative land holdings, while at the same time, you know, fighting for larger scale decommodification of farmland. Okay, I'll leave it there. Thanks so much. Looking forward to hearing what Peachtree has to say.
Thank you, Katherine. Peachtree, go ahead when you're ready.
Ready. Let me just see if I can get some screen sharing going here.
Yep, take your time. I can already feel that this is going to be a good discussion. And just a note, like you can, I think it's fine for folks to be adding your questions. And I appreciate that everyone's waiting to respond until the speakers are done their presentation, so we don't get distracted. So thanks. You can feel free to add your questions, but we will respond to them after in the chat period, the discussion period. Thank you. Go ahead, Peachtree.
Hi, everybody. Sorry, I was a little bit late earlier today. Can everyone hear me? Perfect.
Yes.
Yeah, I was just coming back from the farm and wanting to get comfortable before I came on to camera. My name is Peachtree, and I'm here representing actually a group of farmers and land workers that have come together to attempt to get into the farming space and to really look at how we as Black farmers can access land, but also come up with a response to some of the things that we see happening, which is our inaccess to land currently. I'm sorry, I just want to open my notes. Oh, this is not even the front. I'm sorry, it's not at the front. I'm not sure what happened.
It's all good. Slides can elude us.
I don't know what happened. It just went on its own.
I saw that.
Okay, so National Black Farmer Fund and Resource Network excluded from the land, building responses and building together. So yes, as I said, my name is Peachtree and I'm here representing the National Black Farmer Fund. Sorry, my notes. The National Black Farmer Fund works to develop financial supports through mutual aid, collective fundraising and skill sharing. And we go through a 1-year period of fundraising, and it provides monetary supports for the group of farmers that are working together. It's built by Black farmers for Black farmers. And this is our inaugural year. This is starting in 2022, 2023, a group of farmers really got together and discussed, you know, we see that we work on smaller spaces of land. We are some of those farmers that we talk about, people that are farming on farmland, but living in a city. We don't have access to getting onto the land where we can be closer to the land and do some of the things that we would like to do, including going towards organic growing. So we decided to come together and figure out, well, how can we do this together? And it's a new idea, and really thinking about how we can advance some of the things that we're looking for. during the inaugural year, we are working with farmer people within our network who do not have access to generational wealth, but contribute significantly to the landscape of food security and justice across Canada and beyond. Our goal is to propel their work forward and to build a more robust and sustainable food system that's centered on some of our needs. So we know Black farmers are intimately aware of the barriers they are facing in securing usable farmland, accessing and retaining arable land that is both affordable and offers proper infrastructure. This continues to be a struggle for these marginalized farmers. Many Black farmers in Canada have generations of momentum behind them. Many farmers in Canada have generations of momentum behind them, access to land and resources and experiences. If you are Black or brown, an immigrant, the hill to climb is steep, the cost keeps going up, the tools you need are now much larger to obtain. But most of all, rooting yourself in a rural community will take all the bravery and persistence you can muster. We do play a rich part and an integral part in the history of this country, as well as the agricultural landscape. However, Black farmers are rarely represented in leadership roles and farming organizations, and sometimes even community groups. This leads to our work and our needs to fall by the wayside, which further impacts our community and fractures them from accessing healthy, locally grown community food. Sorry about that. See if I can get this to go. Our food systems are made stronger when we welcome diversity deliberately with the open arms, and diversity in the industry rejuvenates our demographically reclining rural communities and offers better food options to feeding our diverse populations. So this is what brought the groups of farmers together to do some of this work. So how the fund works. It was established in December, well, actually a little bit earlier, maybe about August of 2021. Farmers and land workers came together following conversations about wanting to not just fundraise, but build a resource network to strengthen their work on the land and as business owners. The National Black Farmer Fund, we're building a platform to uplift the voices, and the development and goals of the National Black Farmer Fund is to continue to create a space led by us and connecting groups and individuals with shared interests and lived experiences regarding challenging, oppressive, extractive structures and food systems throughout Turtle Island, while inspiring each other by building a resource network for us and by us. We aim to, number one, collaborate with both the fund and the resource members to fundraise and using alternative forms of resource development. So it's been interesting meeting, and particularly with the elders in the network. You know, we have an experience of being blocked out from financial spaces and even having the access to getting into these spaces. So they have taken me right back to the old school. They were like, we want to do our fundraising in a different way, you know? So rent parties, how we've gathered, Susu, looking at land spaces that Black communities have used to continue to develop and communicate with each other, like lacus that are coming out of Haiti. And there is a lacu here in Canada, in Quebec. One of our members, Jean-Philippe, runs the Jardin Lacu, but really looking at some of these models around how we can start to communicate with each other and start to strengthen our work together. So with the resource network, we have been working with research folks because we recognize that there's many of these stories coming across. Our members are coming from Vancouver straight from Quebec. Most of our members are in Ontario. We have a young member in Vancouver, and then Jean-Philippe, who's running the Jardin Lacu in Quebec. And so we want to continue to develop the resource network by partnering with community-based research spaces to document the voices of Black farmers, to really talk about what they're looking for so that their voices are included in many of these conversations, and continuing to develop the support for the organizational building. So right now it's set up in a way where we are an association. We meet bi-weekly, we have roving meetings, farmers come in, they talk about what they're experiencing, they come with their ideas that to myself and another administrator help them to manifest on either on their locations, or if we do it through networking on Zooms or using social media platforms for us to build some of our momentum, because we do understand that a part of this work is politicizing what has been happening with us as Black farmers. One hand washes the other, expresses the idea of community building with a focus on community economics and shared resource building. The space is unique because it's developed and maintained by a coordination space while using a resource sharing model. The space was developed with 8 inspirational farmers, 7 amazing projects, 2 coordinators with 1 big idea. We hope to move the conversation from Black food security to actionable steps towards Black food sovereignty. We believe in the power of our collective resource sharing and land access and the economic development as a tool to build food systems rooted in community nourishment and ancestral wisdom. So some of these are some of the folks that are a part of our network. We have Alicia, who is in Vancouver, and she works with Legacy Growers Collective, and she began farming. She's actually our youngest member. She began farming right before the pandemic and was looking to secure local space to produce cultural food for her community members and then she began organizing a pandemic safe space to welcome Black folks for land-based learning and healing. And this has been a common thread, that while we do want access to do the work of farming, but it is about connecting with the land and having a long-standing time with the land and developing our skills on the land. So Alicia is our youngest member. Ayana runs Roots and Culture, and Ayana is, she's actually a stonemason and she's a builder. It was important as we built the network to understand that it wasn't just about who was going to do the growing, but who was going to do the building and all these other pieces that we needed. So she's a stonemason and also does landscaping. She does horticultural construction, and really has an idea about bringing young people together to pick up the skills to continue this work. You know, I find most of the things that I see on farms that are very intriguing, you know, farmers build the most amazing things. We keep things, we find things, and we put them together to make them useful for us. And she really wants to pass this idea and these pieces on to young people. A part of our network as well too is Chad. Chad does tree work, and he's also actually out in Guelph. He runs Kalima Farms, which is Black Mother Farms, and they're working with food crops, but also trees. He's an arborist, and he has a small plot there. It's so tiny, an acre, and looking to expand, but also definitely working with young people around farming. Jackie and Noel are our elders at the table. They are the Black farmers of Toronto. They are in a few spaces, which is Downsview Park, so tiny, in a public area. You know, again, we tend to be pushed on pieces of land that we do not have a lot of control over, but we can access through finances. So it is, you know, public space. Folks are walking through the garden while they are growing for production and sale. At farmers markets, restaurants, and grocery stores. So it's very tight for them, you know, but they are in that space because of where they are. They also have a community growing space in hopes to continue to encourage people to come back onto the land and to grow some food, you know, taste the difference between some foods that you're getting in the grocery stores and some foods that you're getting directly from a farm. And we have Jean-Philippe. Jean-Philippe, inspired by the Creole gardens in Haiti, the Jardin La Cour is an agribusiness, or, you know, he's working towards running a business. And again, he is on another family's property in Dunham, Quebec. And it offers Caribbean and African flavors through production of certain varieties of vegetables from these regions, as well as local varieties of vegetables, berries, and fresh herbs. And in the medium term, it's also been selling tropical fruits and plants and trees for containers cultivation, such as mangoes, passion fruits, and curry plants. And they currently are working through CSA model and retail sales at farmer stands, wholesale. And last but not least, I have Lori. Lori runs our market. So again, it was important for us to have a network of many people coming in when it came to talking about how we access farming space and how we access our food as a community. And Lori runs for Canada's first culturally specific farmers market, and is found and that's in it's a unique market, and it's located in Toronto, but it's held in a tiny space, a green pea market. I spend a lot of time studying some of these spaces, and I think in her first 2 weeks, she had 1,000 points of contact every single market. I don't think we had enough actual farmers available for the people that came through the market. So we see community members want to get into this space. We just don't have access to some of these spaces. And then last but not least, myself, I am the co-coordinator of this network. I also am a beekeeper, and I'm intimately involved with seeds and beads. That's my goal. And really, I do farm a little bit outside of Toronto. That's in Lemonville. Again, it's land that a farmer has offered me some space on. You know, I give thanks for that. And similar to what most Black farmers know, I don't have a lease for my land. I think farmers kind of get sticky with that conversation around some of the leases. So I am on a piece of land that I don't know how long I will be on. So, you know, as we continue to build, we are trying to build some solutions to the things that we see coming down the pipeline. You know, I was very intrigued when I was asked to be on this panel with the financialization, because it is such a big energy that blocks us from farmland. And while we stand in spaces to try to politicize how we've been removed from the access to even being able to buy the farmland, we still want to move towards our goals of farming. So trying to come up with solutions while working with our other institutions, like our schools, like our government officials, to advance what we need, which is we need some space for us to get in there. And we don't have the finances in that way because we haven't traditionally been attached to land. And if we have been attached to land, we've kind of been removed from that land, as we see in many farming communities that did have Black presence there. And really pushing to bring our presence back to the forefront and join the band of farmers that are working so hard to feed us across Canada. So thank you for hearing me out, and I give thanks for having me here. I'm going to stick around and listen to more of the stuff at this conference, and thank you. You can keep in contact with us if you're interested in any of these spaces. Thank you.